The night Einar was born, the sky split open as if the gods themselves had drawn steel against one another. Thunder did not roll. It cracked. It shattered the silence of the fjord like an axe biting into bone. The sea below the cliffs roared against the rocks of Nordfjall, and every man in the village felt it in his chest, not as sound, but as warning. Inside the long house of Jarl Styrbjörn, the torches guttered violently, bending sideways in the wind that forced its way through the timber cracks. Smoke crawled along the ceiling beams like restless spirits searching for an exit. And then came the scream, not of battle, not of fear, but of birth. Sigrid labored on furs darkened with sweat, her fingers clawing at the woven wool beneath her as another contraction tore through her body. The midwife whispered prayers to gods she no longer trusted. Outside, warriors gathered under the eaves, pretending not to listen. Storms on the night of a birth were never blessings. They were omens. Jarl Styrbjörn stood apart from his men, unmoving despite the rain soaking his cloak. His face was carved from stone, but his jaw flexed with every cry that escaped the hall. He had buried 2 sons already, one to fever, one to the sea. He did not look at the sky. He stared at the door. Another scream split the air, raw, primal, defiant. The wind surged violently at that exact moment, slamming the hall doors inward with a thunderous crash. The warriors instinctively reached for their blades. Inside, the midwife gasped. The child had arrived, but he did not cry. For one terrible heartbeat, there was nothing. No thunder, no wind, no breath. Sigrid's exhausted body trembled as she lifted her head weakly, searching the midwife's face for hope, and finding none. The storm outside seemed to inhale, waiting. Then the child opened his eyes, not slowly, not blindly, but sharply, as if he had arrived, already aware. The midwife froze. The baby's gaze did not wander like a newborn should. It fixed forward, unblinking, steady, unsettling. His small fingers curled, not in helpless instinct, but in tension. And then he cried. But it was no fragile wail. It was fierce. It tore through the hall like a battle horn. Outside, the thunder answered immediately. The warriors exchanged uneasy glances. Jarl Styrbjörn stepped forward at last, crossing the threshold as if entering a battlefield. The midwife hesitated before placing the child in his arms. The Jarl looked down at his son. Rainwater dripped from his beard onto the infant's skin. The baby did not flinch. He stared back. Father and son locked eyes in silence while the storm raged around them. Styrbjörn felt it then, not joy, not relief. Something heavier, a weight settling into his bones. This child would not live quietly. This child would not die gently. The torches flickered again, and a violent gust extinguished half of them, plunging the hall into trembling shadow. In that dim light, the newborn's face seemed older somehow, sharpened by something unseen. Sigrid reached weakly toward them. "Is he strong?" she whispered. Styrbjörn did not answer immediately. He studied the boy's gaze, unwavering, almost accusatory. "Yes," he finally said, but his voice carried doubt. Far above the village, on the black cliffs overlooking the sea, a lone figure watched through the storm. A seer, cloaked in sodden wool, unmoving despite the wind that threatened to tear lesser men from the rocks. Her pale eyes reflected lightning as it split the sky again. She had felt the birth before the thunder. She had tasted it in the air. The threads of fate had tightened tonight. Below her, the longhouse flickered like a dying ember in the storm. The child's cry echoed faintly even against the wind. The seer closed her eyes and whispered a single word into the darkness. Oath. Inside the hall, the newborn suddenly fell silent. Too silent. His small chest rose and fell steadily, but his eyes remained open, watching, as if he too had heard the word carried by the storm. And somewhere deep in the roaring dark beyond the fjord, something ancient had awakened. The silence did not last. It never does. The storm resumed its violence, as if angered by the stillness, wind clawing at the longhouse walls with renewed fury. The doors trembled on their hinges. The torches fought desperately against extinction, but inside, a different storm had begun. Jarl Styrbjörn still held the child, and though the infant's body was warm, alive, breathing, there was something unsettling in the quiet steadiness of him. No frantic movement, no helpless flailing, only observation, as if measuring the world he had entered. Sigrid's breathing slowed, exhaustion pulling her toward darkness. Yet she sensed it too. A mother always does. She did not see a fragile newborn. She saw weight. "Give him to me," she whispered. Styrbjörn hesitated, only for a heartbeat, before kneeling beside her and placing the child in her trembling arms. The boy did not cry again. He turned slightly toward his mother's warmth, but his gaze drifted past her shoulder, towards the doorway, toward the storm. Outside, the warriors murmured among themselves, "This is no common night." The thunder answered him, "Did you hear how the wind changed?" Superstition travels quickly in the cold. One of the younger men spat into the mud as if warding off spirits. Storm-born children bring either glory or ruin. Styrbjörn heard them. He said nothing, but their words dug into him. Inside, the midwife wrapped the boy in thick wool, though the air had grown strangely colder. A draft moved across the floor like an unseen hand. The flames dimmed again, and then the longhouse doors creaked open, not slammed, not forced, opened. The wind parted around the threshold. Every warrior turned. She stood there, the seer. Rain soaked her hair into silver strands against her face. Her cloak clung to her thin frame, heavy with seawater, yet she moved forward without struggle. No one barred her path. No one dared. Styrbjörn rose slowly to his feet, placing himself between her and Sigrid. "You were not summoned," he said. Her pale eyes shifted toward the child. "I do not wait for summons," she replied quietly. Her voice did not compete with the storm, yet everyone heard it. She stepped closer, stopping just beyond the firelight. Shadows wrapped around her like old companions. The baby turned his head. He looked directly at her. The seer inhaled sharply. There it is, not fear, recognition. The warriors felt it, that tightening in the chest when something unseen settles into the room. "What do you see?" Styrbjörn demanded. The seer did not answer at once. She studied the boy's face, his unblinking gaze, the way his small fingers flexed slowly within the wool. "The threads are knotted," she said finally. Silence swallowed the hall. "Speak plainly," the Jarl warned. She lifted her chin. "He will bind men with words stronger than iron." A pause. "He will break blood with oaths." Sigrid tightened her hold instinctively. "And his fate?" Styrbjörn asked, though something in him already resisted the answer. The seer's eyes flicked toward the storm-battered doorway. "The sea will take from him." Another pause. "And he will take from the sea." The wind howled violently, shaking the hall as if to underline her words. Styrbjörn's jaw tightened. Every man loses something to the sea. She looked back at him then, and for the first time, there was something like warning in her expression. This one will lose more. The torches flickered again. The baby's grip tightened suddenly around the edge of the wool, knuckles whitening as if grasping something invisible. The seer stepped closer, just enough that firelight caught her eyes fully. He will stand where fathers fall. The words struck harder than thunder. For a moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against the roof. Styrbjörn felt the weight settle deeper into his chest. Not prophecy, not destiny, inevitability. The seer slowly reached out a hand, not touching the child, merely hovering above him. The baby did not flinch. Instead, he stared into her eyes with unsettling calm. And then he did something no newborn should. He smiled, not in innocence, but in challenge. The seer withdrew her hand sharply as if burned. "The storm is not here because of him," she whispered. "It came with him." The hall seemed smaller suddenly, colder. Sigrid's breath trembled. "What must we do?" she asked. The seer's gaze never left the child. "Teach him the cost of an oath." Outside, lightning struck the cliffs above Nordfjall with blinding brilliance, and for the briefest instant, high upon the rocks overlooking the fjord, something moved against the light, watching the longhouse below, waiting. The lightning faded, but the image of it remained burned into every mind inside the hall. Something had stood upon the cliffs, not imagined, not mistaken, seen. The warriors rushed outside despite the rain, boots sinking into mud, shields raised instinctively as if expecting arrows from the sky. Wind lashed their faces raw. The sea crashed violently against the black stone below Nordfjall. They saw nothing. Only jagged rock, only storm, only darkness, thick enough to swallow shapes. But unease does not vanish when sight fails. It grows. Inside the longhouse, the seer had not moved. She stood motionless, listening, not to the storm, but to something deeper, something beneath it. Jarl Styrbjörn returned first, water streaming from his shoulders. "There is nothing," he said. His voice carried frustration more than relief. The seer's lips barely curved. "There is always something." Sigrid shifted weakly on the furs, her strength draining with each passing moment. The child rested against her chest, but he did not sleep. His eyes remained open, dark and reflective, as though light itself hesitated inside them. The storm's fury began to dull, not fading entirely, but withdrawing slightly, like a beast that had made its mark and stepped back to observe. The midwife whispered that the gods had spoken. No one answered her. Styrbjörn approached Sigrid again, kneeling beside her. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to look fully at his son, not as an omen, not as prophecy, but as blood. The boy's fingers flexed again. Strong grip, unnaturally strong. Styrbjörn extended one calloused finger. The child seized it instantly, tight, unyielding. The Jarl felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not pride, responsibility. "You will be named Einar," he said quietly. The name carried weight in their line. It had belonged to a warrior 3 generations past, one who held a shield wall alone while his brothers retreated, one who swore never to yield ground, one who died standing. The seer closed her eyes briefly at the sound of it. Names are seeds, and seeds grow toward their nature. Outside, the warriors returned, unsettled and drenched. The youngest among them, Leif, could not hide the tremor in his voice. "I felt watched," he muttered. Styrbjörn stood slowly. "You were watched," he said. The words silenced them. The seer turned toward the door, her presence already thinning, as if her purpose here had ended. "Remember what I said," she murmured. But before she could leave, Einar let out another cry. Not loud, not desperate, sharp, commanding. Every head snapped toward him. The cry did not waver. It did not break. It sustained itself far longer than a newborn's lungs should allow. The storm outside responded again, wind rising abruptly, rain intensifying for a brief violent surge before settling once more. The seer stopped. Slowly, she turned back. This time, there was no composure in her gaze, only recognition. "It begins early," she whispered. Sigrid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. She pulled Einar closer instinctively, as if the world itself had reached toward him. Styrbjörn noticed something then. The torches nearest the child burned brighter, while those farther away dimmed. Light gathered close to him. Shadow retreated, but only slightly. The seer stepped backward toward the doorway. "Guard him," she said softly, "but do not cage him." And with that, she vanished into the rain without another word. The hall felt emptier without her, though the air remained heavy. One by one, the warriors drifted back to their places, speaking little. No celebration, no ale raised in triumph, only silence, only thought. Styrbjörn remained beside Sigrid until her eyes finally closed from exhaustion. The midwife covered her gently with thick furs and moved away. Now it was only father and son beneath the wavering firelight. Einar's grip had not loosened. Styrbjörn leaned closer. "You will not be taken by fever," he murmured. "You will not be taken by the sea." He did not realize he was making a vow. But vows are not always spoken loudly. Sometimes they are forged in whispers. Einar's gaze shifted upward, past his father, toward the roof beams, toward the smoke-darkened rafters, as if he sensed something there, watching. The fire cracked sharply, sending sparks upward, and for the briefest flicker of a moment, between the beams and the drifting smoke, a shape formed in the shadow, tall, still, observing, then gone. Styrbjörn did not see it, but Einar did not blink. Outside, the storm began to move away from Nordfjall, rolling across the sea toward distant lands. It had delivered something, and it had taken something unseen in return. Inside the longhouse, the newborn's breathing finally slowed, but his eyes remained open long into the night. As if sleep were a luxury he did not intend to accept. As if even now he was listening. Dawn did not arrive gently. It bled into the sky behind layers of bruised cloud, turning the fjord the color of cold iron. The storm had moved on, but it left something behind, a silence too complete to be natural. No gulls cried, no waves crashed violently now. The sea lay unnervingly still. Inside the longhouse, embers glowed beneath ash. Most of the warriors had fallen into restless sleep where they sat, weapons still within reach. No one had truly relaxed. Styrbjörn had not slept at all. He remained seated near Sigrid, his back against a carved support beam. Einar cradled carefully in his arms. The child had finally closed his eyes some time before dawn. But even in sleep, his brow remained faintly furrowed, as if dreaming were labor. The Jarl studied his son's face in the gray morning light. Without the storm, Without thunder and prophecy, the boy appeared small, fragile, human, and yet the memory of that grip lingered in his finger, too firm, too deliberate. Footsteps approached from outside, measured, heavy. Styrbjörn's head lifted. The doors opened slowly, not with violence this time, but with intent. A tall figure entered, removing a rain-damp cloak. Bjorn Halfhand, Styrbjörn's brother, his left forearm ended at the wrist, taken years ago in a raid across the Western Sea. The stump was wrapped in leather bindings, hardened with use. Bjorn's eyes scanned the hall quickly before settling on the child. "So it is true," he said quietly. "You felt it?" Styrbjörn asked. Bjorn nodded once. The sea changed. He stepped closer, studying Einar without touching him. "I saw lightning strike the cliffs," Bjorn continued, "and for a moment I thought I saw someone standing there." Styrbjörn's jaw tightened. "You were not the only one." Silence settled between the brothers. Bjorn crouched slightly, bringing his face level with the sleeping child. "He looks calm," he observed. "He is not," Styrbjörn replied. Bjorn's gaze flicked upward at that. Before either man could speak again, a sharp cry split the morning air, not from within the hall, from outside. Both men stood instantly. Another cry followed, panicked this time. Styrbjörn handed Einar carefully to Sigrid, who stirred awake at the commotion. "What is it?" she whispered. "I do not know," he answered, but he already felt it, that tightening, that inevitability. The brothers stepped outside into the cold morning light. Villagers were gathered near the animal pens at the edge of Nordfjall, faces pale, voices hushed. Something lay in the mud. Styrbjörn pushed through the small crowd and stopped. One of the goats had been slaughtered, not for meat, not cleanly. Its throat was cut deep, but not with precision. The body was untouched otherwise, no flesh taken, no tracks clearly visible in the churned earth. Bjorn knelt, examining the wound. "This was done with a blade," he muttered. "Not teeth." Styrbjörn scanned the ground. The mud was disturbed, but the storm had ruined clear signs. Yet something felt deliberate about it. The animal was positioned facing the longhouse, facing Einar's birthplace. A murmur rippled through the villagers, an offering, a warning. "From whom?" someone whispered. Styrbjörn straightened slowly. "This is the work of men," he said firmly, but conviction did not fill his voice. Bjorn stood as well. "There are no tracks leading away." The wind shifted lightly across the fjord, carrying the scent of salt and iron. Styrbjörn turned toward the cliffs above the village, the same cliffs where lightning had struck, the same cliffs where something had been seen. Empty now, but watching need not require presence. Behind him, the longhouse doors creaked open again. Sigrid stepped out, Einar wrapped tightly in wool against her chest. "I heard shouting," she called softly. Styrbjörn moved toward her immediately, blocking her view of the slaughtered animal. "It is nothing," he said, but she read his face. It was not nothing. Einar stirred within her arms. His eyes opened. The morning light touched them. He did not cry. He did not fuss. He stared past his father's shoulder, toward the dead animal, toward the blood in the mud, and slowly his fingers curled. Bjorn noticed it. So did Styrbjörn. The child's gaze did not waver. The wind lifted slightly again, brushing across the fjord, and somewhere beyond the still water, far beyond sight, A sail shifted direction, not toward trade, not toward peace, but toward Nordfjall. The sail had not been there the night before. Bjorn saw it first, a thin shadow against the pale horizon, barely visible between the shifting bands of morning mist. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if testing the currents rather than surrendering to them. Styrbjörn followed his brother's gaze. Longships were not uncommon along these waters, but no trading vessel approached in silence. No ally arrived without signal fire. This ship bore no banner, no painted shield along its sides, only a dark hull cutting through calm water. "How long?" Styrbjörn asked. Bjorn squinted against the light. By midday. The villagers had begun whispering again, their eyes shifting between the dead animal and the distant sail. Storm, birth, slaughter, now this. Patterns form quickly in fearful minds. Sigrid felt the tension ripple through the air like a tightening rope. She held Einar closer, though he showed no discomfort. He was watching the sea, not with curiosity, with focus, as if he understood that something approached with intention. Styrbjörn turned sharply. "Prepare the watchfires. Arm the men." His voice cut through doubt. Action steadied fear. Warriors dispersed at once, retrieving shields, sharpening blades, checking the integrity of leather straps hardened by old blood and salt. Bjorn remained beside his brother. "Do you believe this is connected?" he asked quietly. Styrbjörn did not answer immediately. He looked back at the goat's body still lying in the mud, facing the longhouse, facing his son. "Yes," he said at last. Bjorn studied him carefully. "Then this is not a raid?" "No." A pause. "It is a message." The wind shifted again, stronger now, pushing against the approaching vessel. Yet the ship did not slow. It adjusted, corrected, continued forward. Inside the longhouse, Sigrid laid Einar down briefly within a cradle carved from ash wood generations earlier. The same cradle that had held his brothers. She hesitated. The memory of their small bodies, fevered and fading, pressed against her chest like a phantom weight. But Einar did not seem fragile. He lay on his back, eyes open, staring upward at the smoke-darkened beams. Listening, always listening. Sigrid knelt beside him. "You were born into thunder," she whispered. "Do not let thunder claim you." Outside, horns began to sound across Nordfjall. Not in panic, but in readiness. Styrbjörn stood at the shoreline now, warriors forming behind him in disciplined lines, shields interlocked, spears angled. Bjorn took position at his side. The ship grew clearer with each passing moment. No shields along its hull, no visible crew on deck. Too quiet. The sea lapped gently against stone, as if unaware of the tension it carried. Styrbjörn felt something else then, not fear, recognition. This was not chaos approaching, it was design. The longship angled slightly as it neared the shallows, turning broadside just far enough to reveal its carved prow. A wolf's head, mouth open, teeth bared. Bjorn inhaled sharply. "That mark?" Styrbjörn's face hardened. "I know it." The name formed silently in his mind before he allowed it breath. Hrafn, exiled, banished years ago for oath-breaking and kinslaying, a man who swore vengeance when cast out, a man who disappeared beyond known waters. And now, the ship slowed. A single figure stepped forward onto its deck. Tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in blackened leather. Even at a distance, Styrbjörn could feel the weight of his stare. The figure did not raise a weapon, did not shout. He simply stood there, letting silence stretch across the water between them. Bjorn tightened his grip on his axe. He comes with no army. Styrbjörn's eyes never left the man. He does not need one. Behind them, from within the longhouse, Einar suddenly began to cry, not in fear, not in hunger, but in fierce, defiant sound. The wind rose sharply again, the sails snapped, and across the water the distant figure slowly lifted one hand, as if acknowledging the cry. The wind did not howl this time. It tightened, like breath drawn before a blade strikes. Einar's cry carried across Nordfjall, sharp and unwavering, echoing against stone and sea. Every warrior felt it ripple through their spine. Styrbjörn did not turn toward the longhouse. He did not need to. The sound rooted itself in him. Across the water, the cloaked figure remained motionless for several long heartbeats after lifting his hand. Not a greeting, not surrender, recognition. Then, slowly, deliberately, the man lowered his hand and removed the hood from his head. Even at a distance, the scar was visible, a jagged line cutting from brow to jaw. Hrafn, exiled blood, oath-breaker, kin-slayer. The sea shifted gently around his ship as if unwilling to disturb the moment. Bjorn stepped slightly forward. We should strike before he reaches shore? No, Styrbjörn answered quietly. This is not a raid. The longship scraped against the shallows at last. No warriors leapt from its sides. No shields rose in defense. Only Hrafn moved. He stepped into the water alone. Cold waves climbed his boots, then his shins, yet he did not hesitate. Each stride toward shore was measured, certain. Behind Styrbjörn, shields tightened, spears lowered. The villagers watched from higher ground, breath shallow. Children pulled close to their mothers. Inside the longhouse, Sigrid gathered Einar into her arms once more. His cry had ceased as abruptly as it began. Now he was silent, alert. She felt his heartbeat steady against her chest. Strong, too strong. Outside, Hrafn reached dry sand. He stopped just beyond spear range, close enough to see clearly, far enough to avoid immediate bloodshed. Time stretched thin. Styrbjörn stepped forward alone. The two men faced each other with only wet earth between them. You were cast out, Styrbjörn said evenly. Hrafn's eyes flicked briefly toward the longhouse before returning. I was, he replied. His voice carried no anger. That made it worse. You swore never to return. I swore many things. A flicker of something passed across Styrbjörn's face at that. Wind moved between them, tugging at cloaks and hair. You bring no army, Styrbjörn observed. Hrafn tilted his head slightly. I bring truth. A murmur stirred among the warriors behind their jarl. Styrbjörn's expression did not shift. Speak it. Hrafn's gaze drifted once more toward the hall where Einar had been born. The storm was not an omen, he said. It was a herald. Silence. Bjorn's grip tightened, visibly. You dare speak of omens? He growled. Hrafn ignored him. He has been marked, Hrafn continued calmly. The boy. Styrbjörn's voice lowered. You have not seen him. I do not need to. A pause. The same night your son was born, a fire consumed 3 ships in the western inlet. A ripple of surprise passed through the warriors. No lightning struck them, Hrafn said softly. No enemy touched them. They burned from within. The wind shifted again, colder now. Coincidence, Bjorn spat. Hrafn's eyes finally hardened. There are no coincidences when the old gods wake. Styrbjörn stepped closer, stopping within arm's reach. If you came to threaten my blood, I came to warn you, Hrafn interrupted quietly, and that unsettled them more than any blade could have. The boy will bind men to him, Hrafn said, and when he breaks an oath, he let the words hang. The sea gave a slow, heavy sigh against the shore. Styrbjörn felt it then, not fear, not doubt, a thread tightening around his fate. You speak as if you know what he will become. Hrafn's gaze sharpened. I know what hunts him. The words landed like falling stone. Behind them, from within the longhouse, Einar began to cry again. But this time, the cry was different, lower, almost growling. The wind surged violently once more, whipping sand into the air between the two men. Hrafn leaned closer, voice barely audible beneath the rising gust. You should not have named him Einar. Styrbjörn's eyes narrowed. That name died with a warrior who held his ground alone. Hrafn's lips curved faintly. Yes, a beat. And some warriors die standing because something refuses to let them fall. Lightning flickered far out at sea, though no storm cloud lingered. Hrafn stepped backward slowly toward the water. This is only the beginning, he said. The wind swallowed the rest of his words. As he turned toward his ship, Einar's cry echoed one final time across Nordfjall and deep beneath the still surface of the fjord. Something ancient shifted, awake.